Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, and I try to find people from around the globe who are knowledgeable in astrology so we can discuss this fascinating subject and try to get the air clear about certain ideas and just, see what astrology has to offer and explore all the different avenues. My guest today is Robert Currey. He is behind the equinoxastrology.com, where you see his writing, and he's a well-known astrologer in the world. And I recently saw a posting on Facebook that we're going to get into for the topic today, which is sort of the whole concept of the Vedic, Eastern astrology versus Western astrology and all the finagles that go on with that. Before we do, I want to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon about 1:30, and in there you'll find about 2 or 3 paragraphs of mundane astrology, as you know, which applies to all of us on the planet. And then I break it out into the individual signs. I encourage you to read your sun sign as well as your rising sign. If you know your moon sign, throw that in there too. And you'll get an idea for the flavor of what to happen in the week to come. I'm not going to tell you to buy a lottery ticket on Tuesday, but you'll get a pretty good idea of what's coming up in your week ahead. And I have great results with it, great feedback. So without any further ado, let me get my guest on. His name is Robert Currey. He's behind equinoxastrology.com is the website. And as I said, I hooked up with him through Facebook. I saw that he had done some talking about there, so it's great to have him on all the way from the UK. Robert Currey, thank you so much for coming on the air today with me.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Yeah.
Great.
So anyway, yeah. I kind of, the whole conversation piqued my interest. There was recently a fairly large astrology conference, sort of an East meets West conference in India recently. And there was a couple of speakers there who sparked the controversy about the idea that perhaps Vedic astrology or Eastern astrology was not as valid as Western astrology. And it sort of caused a kerfuffle of some sort. And I'm wondering what your take on the whole thing is.
Well, it's an interesting thing. It was the speaker was Dr. Glenn Perry,
right?
Who is
I know him.
An astrologer.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, I respect him a great deal. He's very good and a very eloquent speaker. And what happened was I went to the Indian conference 2 years ago, so I was quite familiar with the environment. It's very ceremonial. It's also a wonderful place for showcasing a lot of astrologers because it's very diverse, and you get astrologers from Russia and all parts of the world, and obviously a lot from North America, UK, Europe. Anyway, what happened was he did a presentation, and his argument is that because the tropical zodiac is evolved through the seasons, and that people had been using the ancient megaliths of Stonehenge and Orkney had all been aligned to the cardinal directions. Mm-hmm. And if you go to Newgrange Island, it's aligned to the rising sun, at the solstice and at both of the solstices. So his argument is that this is the original intent behind the tropical zodiac. It was a seasonal thing. So Aries was the beginning of the year, and that was the time of planting, and Libra, equaled equinox, equal days, equal nights. So he had this model, and that was great. Now, there was the kerfuffle, was not because he was criticizing the sidereal zodiac. I mean, his point is that the sidereal zodiac is redundant. He used the word a vestigial organ, like a tailbone that we have that we just don't use, which it was a little bit offensive, and certainly those who were there felt it was very inappropriate because they were guests, and the purpose of the conference was East meets West, They were very generous hosts. And it's very ceremonial, as I say. And astrology is sacred in India. So when you do criticize it, you're treading on delicate ground, but you're certainly allowed to go there. And that wasn't my issue. That was other people's. Most of the other visitors, and there must have been about 50 from all over the world outside India, felt that it wasn't appropriate, the manner that it was presented. And that's an issue for them. For me, I acknowledge that. But my contention is basically that he was wrong. And basically what it was his conclusion was very hard, but it was based on history. It was based on his interpretation of history, because even if it is based on the seasons, the zodiac, and it probably, certainly in Hellenistic times, it was, but originally in Babylonian times, it probably was based more on the constellations. But if it is based on the seasons, how does it work for the Southern Hemisphere? One very simple point. And I'm a tropical astrologer, but I also think that, I've got 4 planets in Libra, so I'm quite interested in fair play. And I thought that, his argument could run both ways, because maybe it was intended for the stars, maybe it was intended for the seasons. It could work both ways, but it didn't matter. What was it intended for didn't really matter, because, is it useful? And does it work? That would be the acid test for me, not the history. It's like, the guy who wrote the Post-it note, it was invented, the glue for the Post-it note. He was inventing a glue, but it turned out to have a very different application.
Right.
So it's the same with the zodiac. It could work for other reasons. And unless we know the mechanism for how it works, we're really, guessing. We're guessing. So I felt that the only test that he could use was actually an empirical test with a control group, and looking at how the 2 zodiacs work for certain claims. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wouldn't prove or disprove each zodiac, but all it would do would say, well, if you make a claim that extrovert people have fire in their chart, and they, and it works for one system and not the other, then you can say, well, it does apply in that way. But you can't say, oh, the whole system, the system of 2,000 years now practiced by 500 million people, the Vedic system, is of no value, or is a vestigial organ, as he calls it.
Right. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was always struck by the fact that there are these. I always held the contention that if you took a Vedic chart and a Vedic astrologer, and you took a Western astrologer and a Western chart, you put them in the same room, they would come away with the same characteristics, regardless of the methodology you used to get there. That's my sort of belief.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point. I had the astrology shop I used to run.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a Vedic, this is in London, in Covent Garden, it's still going. And we had a Vedic
Frank Clifford is there now, I think, yeah.
Yeah, he's supported. He's not running it. Barry Street is running it. But anyway, so and we used to have a Vedic astrologer come in, and he was, for us, he was Scorpio rising. For him, he was Libra rising. And the interesting about it was that all the staff got very riled. He tended to be quite provocative and stir up a lot of stuff. Every time he came in, people kind of, oh my God, here he comes. And he thought he was charming and, very Libran. So it was just interesting, as an example of, I could see, how it was. And it is, I think Glenn afterwards has been arguing with people. And it's this never-ending argument, which is like, we'll look at this chart, we'll cherry-pick a chart, and then compare it on the 2 systems. And as he says, there are a lot of confounding factors. I've got Sun in Libra and Mars in Virgo. And I could very easily put my Sun in Virgo, because Mars in Virgo and Sun in Virgo aren't too far different. So, it's a very difficult one to argue based on charts. But I think you're right. I've seen Vedic astrologers do amazing stuff. So I have a lot of respect for them.
So do I, and I've always thought that in many ways, I mean, I am a Western astrologer, but in many ways, I've always sort of deferred in some way to the Vedic astrologers because of the precision in which they can come up with. They sort of have a much more granular. I suppose you could argue this for both cases, but their approach seems to be more granular and precise, especially when it comes for prediction. I thought that was far more the case.
Yeah.
But the whole problem I always had from the beginning was the idea of the precession of the equinoxes, which I think makes sense to me from a sort of a geography level or whatever astronomical level, because of the fact that the Earth does have this wobble, and the wobble is accommodated for by the precession of equinoxes, which theoretically makes sense to me on a sort of a scientific level. But I'm an Aries in the Western astrology. I don't see myself as a Pisces by any stretch of the imagination. Although I do have Venus in Pisces, so you could argue, well, there's that there. But I'm too much of a fiery person to be a Pisces. I just don't see myself that way. I have very strong Piscean characteristics because I've got, as I said, I've got Venus in Pisces, and that is a very strong component. It's probably my most elevated planet in my chart, my Venus. But I still think I'm an Aries, and I've always felt that way. And the description of Aries reads true for me.
Yeah, you sound to me like an Aries.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was 5 years old, my father's boss called me the little diplomat, and which is a very key, Libra keyword. We had no idea. Astrology meant nothing, but it was just interesting. So that's always been. It's not that I've projected it onto me. It was always how I was. So I sort of agree, and I sort of think that if I went to a Vedic astrologer, he would be looking at the nakshatras, the dashas. He'd be looking at many things, and the Rashi, the signs, would be one part of the whole formula, and probably seen fairly differently because there are different ways they look at things. So I think you could get a good reading from them, definitely.
Yeah,
but I have actually done a bit of testing.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I've done a bit of testing, and I have had some results. I haven't really talked about this, so this might be interesting. I did a test on extroversion, introversion, and I had 200 people, and we got these were very extreme people, and then I worked out the characteristics that went with the what the psychological test said. Oh, this person's extrovert, and these are the qualities. I checked them with Rob Hand and Liz Green and Stephen Arroyo, and got a match, and it said, well, extrovert people are fire, and Earth are introverts. Keep it very simple. And then I tested the numbers. I looked, I just really looked at the Sun, Moon, Ascendant, because you get a lot of replication of your data with Mercury being so close. And it came up highly significant that the people with high extroversion in their psychological nature were also strongly, had fire very strong. And then more recently, we've been looking at Misha Gokula's data, but we haven't published that. And we actually compared tropical and sidereal, but that is yet to be published. I can't tell you the result, but it is an interesting result. Yeah.
Were you able to determine any of this information that you compiled using sort of as an adjunct the whole Myers-Briggs construct? You're familiar with that, right?
Well, yeah, you're right. Well, what it is the Myers-Briggs, obviously, as you know, comes from the Jungian model.
Right.
And the Jungian model is actually not as good for astrology as the I-Sync model, believe it or not. It's because I think it is Earth and water are reversed in the two different systems. So I have reasons to say that's not as good a psychological test, but it's a very popular one. And as you know, being based on Jung, which would go way back to Aristotle and Hellenistic Greece. Mm-hmm. As well, which is connected with astrology. So the most popular test in the world is using. They're really using kind of crypto astrology, we'd probably call it. But,
right. That always fascinated me when I learned about the Myers-Briggs because of how close the parallels were. I think some of the elements are off, but the basic premise and sort of the building blocks of Myers-Briggs do work very well into the realm of astrology to an extent. I think there's certain characteristics that are there.
Oh, yeah.
I think you can see certain personality types mapping quite clearly to their astrology. But the idea that these two different systems have evolved. I mean, how do you address the idea of the precession of equinoxes? What's the sort of the go-to commentary on that? I mean, how do we address that?
Well, the first thing is, I mean, there isn't a question that that it happens, and the idea, Glenn's idea, which is pretty much accepted in the West, actually, that Hipparchus was certainly was the first person recorded to observe that in the 2nd century BC, and accordingly, since his time, more and more astrologers in the West went to, it said that it would be following the seasons, following the equinoxes and solstices, and in the East, Glenn's idea was that they didn't know about precession, and I think that's another questionable point, and therefore they ran with the same system of locking, the constellations as they moved, and so they're more and more out of sync with the seasons. And this is similar to the nakshatras, which is the even older Indian system, a really ancient system, and that was always moving. And since the nakshatras was moving, I think the Indians knew that they knew about precession, in my opinion. So for me, I think the signs. As a Western tropical astrologer, precession is perfectly natural. But as I see it, we are fixed on the seasons. That's how it works. Not necessarily the winter and summer, but the solstice and equinox points.
And the equinox points,
those stars are moving. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the stars are the ones that are moving, whereas the other side, they're locked on the stars.
Yeah, I think the cardinal points are the key point that you're talking about there. You really can't refute them. Those are predictable without a doubt. And it may shift.
But also the quality.
Yeah, it is.
The quality of the signs, like Aries is a starter. I mean, is that not the start of the year? Is that not the beginning of the season? Where plants are starting to spring up, and in the northern hemisphere, but. Also Libra, equinox, equal days, they do tend to follow. And a friend of mine, Ken McCritchie, was saying how the signs of Cancer and Capricorn are to do with hierarchies, hierarchy at work and hierarchy parents and children, which is quite good because you've got these very extreme positions of the light and the sun,
right?
In both north and south. And then, whereas our signs, Aries and Libra, are much more about equals. Like you're an Aries and you make a good competitor and opponent, and I like to debate and argue, and you like to challenge in sport and spar. That's what this is the nature of our signs. We're not as oriented to hierarchies.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And the thing is, you can't really. You can't refute that idea. I mean, the Libra is the diplomat, and we see that sign of the balance, and we're there at the point of year when the balance is most evident. And then, as you said, the Aries begins the initiation, the spring roots come up, and we are off and starting, and the year begins. It does make sense with that regard, of course. And, of course, we see the characteristics are so obvious there with the signs.
Can I be devil's advocate?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I be devil's advocate? And I tell you what it is. And to be really fair to the Vedic people, you look back at the caves at Lascaux, and it looks very like, we are talking probably about 20,000 years ago, and there's a bull, and it looks like star markers, the Pleiades, along this bull, as if the bull, the constellation of the bull, was a bull. And then you get people like Graham Hancock, who says the Sphinx was aligned to the sign of Leo, and so, there is this idea that the constellations had a kind of archetypal meaning, long before, and that's been retained. And then there's another argument a Vedic person may say, well, who's to say those stars don't have some kind of energy that comes from them? And when a planet's in the stars, the energy comes through the planets. I'm just giving an opposing point of view to balance it out.
Yeah, no, I see that, and that does make sense. I mean, from the arc, I mean, when we think of the individual signs and the sort of the constellations that they are representative of, we do see those characteristics very strongly. I mean, a Taurus is a Taurus is a Taurus, and they're going to be stubborn sometimes and very, steadfast and slow and methodical. We see all that, and that does reflect in that. And I think that's where perhaps the confusion comes in. But I think the point you make about the cardinal axes is a valid one, and that really does sort of supersede in some ways the other quality. I think it seems to be overall.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. I would agree because you as I say, the evidence from the Sphinx and the evidence from the bull, it could be coincidence. Whereas there is no question as the way the pyramids are aligned, the Mayflower in the Orkneys, Newgrange, they've all got this alignment. So it was a long time. And the other thing that's very interesting to me is the whole of astrology, or the Mesopotamian astrology, was empirically defined. The guys got up on top of the ziggurats and they recorded in their diaries everything that happened. If the night was clear, and it often is around there, and so there was an empirical development. And I think, of course, at that time, the two zodiacs were getting closer and closer in alignment. But it does seem to me that observation is what brought astrology about. I mean, theory is good, and the Hellenistic astrologers developed this sort of wonderful theory. But I'm going back to saying, well, which system works objectively? Take the astrologer out, because the astrologer may be good. What happens if you get a group of people and you test them on the different zodiacs? And I think that would open up the debate in a very interesting way.
Especially since most scientific analysis is based on empirical data. That is how they form their opinions. That's how they form their theories.
Absolutely.
And so that you really can't refute that. And I think the idea that people would go astray from that is kind of hard. And of course, as time marches on, we are gaining more and more empirical data. Every day that goes by, we have more empirical data about people who are born and how they respond. So that's sort of
you're right.
That substantiates the argument.
Totally.
Yeah.
Completely. I was thinking today. I was out jogging. I looked at my Fitbit, and it's got my heart data. It's got my sleep data. I mean, I could be, looking at how it relates to the full moon and new moons. You're absolutely right. But the interesting thing, Chris, for me, and though I'm very impressed by empirical work, I'm also very impressed by the caring, healing side of our profession. And if someone goes into, does something and they do some technique that makes no sense to me, it's a day for a lunar month, whatever they do, it makes no, it wouldn't be what I would use. But I also know that if the client feels better, if the client feels enlightened, feels healed, and you're giving them something that really beats antidepressants, the psychoactive drugs. Yeah. And so, I don't mind if it's placebo or whether it is divination or intuition that's working. This is another reason I would never reject different techniques if the astrologer is doing the job with the client. Right. And it's ethical, obviously.
Absolutely ethical, and not veering into sort of the dire area of astrology, because you could easily plant that idea in someone's head. I always try to remain optimistic and hopeful in my readings when I speak with people. And I have to say, there are some Vedic astrologers that will have no fear whatsoever, or have no qualms rather, of just diving in and saying, "Well, you may not, you're going to have a terrible day or whatever, a terrible time." I always avoid that. So their precision in that regard can be a bit scary, if that's the word. But I do think that the idea of this, we do serve a valuable function. People don't come to us when everything is hunky dory. They come to us when they're in trial, and so therefore we have to bring sense to them and say, for every square you've got in your chart, you're going to find that they're going to pass. We're going to have these times when we have these cycles of life coming up and coming down, and we have to let them know that there is this pass. And I think that can come from, as you say, the sort of looking at the empirical charts and what we see from them. And of course, we have more empirical knowledge as time marches on. So there really is no real answer to this. And then we look at this other astrology systems that are completely different, that are even more complex. Chinese astrology, I know at the very outside, it looks very simple because we just base it on sort of an animal in a year. But it does work. It does work as well. But I know that's much more complicated.
Well, it's a medium. I never like to call the system of the animals astrology, and I don't mean it in any way offensively to the Chinese system, but simply because it is no connection at all with the only connection is the starting point being the new moon in Aquarius,
right?
But that is it. It is not either a planet or stellar based. It obviously coincides the 12-year cycle with the Jupiter cycle, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I find
my feeling, Chris, is that there isn't really solid evidence, but I have some ideas on this, that it actually came from the Mesopotamian 12-sign zodiac through the Silk Road, and was developed in there and just modified to the local creatures and animals and adapted. It's a bit like we say Chinese whispers, or I can't remember what you call it in America. It's a game, where you pass a message around. It's the same thing with, when you pass astrology to another culture, it gets changed, and sometimes it can be uplifted, or sometimes it can be, well, if I said corrupted, that might be, again, a bit negative, but it doesn't get uplifted, is the best way I'd put it.
Right. But I would observe in Chinese astrology that some of the characteristics do hold up over time. You do see certain people with certain characteristics based on the sign that they have.
Yeah.
I do see compatibility working well with people who are supposed to be compatible. So there are examples of it there. It's just another way of sort of slicing this discussion we're talking about. Either way, it's fascinating.
An interesting point for... Yeah. Well, just to say, the compatibility is often astrological compatibility. Like my Jupiter is in Leo, my wife's is in Aries. So we do have a connection. We become very extravagant whenever we see something we want, but very optimistic about projects. But that in Chinese would also be compatible, being, I think it's eight years apart.
Yes.
And in addition, we're also on the same Venus cycle, which is an interesting thing. Venus, she has a Sun Venus in Virgo, and I have a Sun Venus in Libra.
Interesting.
So just an interesting thing that, the cycle, because that's an 8-year cycle. So it's mind you, I don't know that many couples who are 8 years apart.
Yeah. So the 8-year apart. So I've noticed that I'm a dragon. I think I'm a water dragon in Chinese astrology, and I do get along with I think it's the rat and the monkey I'm supposed to get along with, and I have friends that are rats and monkeys. So I mean, that's just a casual observation, as you know. So it does seem to work, but it still comes back to the idea that there is such wisdom and richness and authenticity and granular precision, I think, with astrology that it's difficult to discount it. And I think that we're coming into an era of time where we might see this take on a new luster of sorts. I think we're on the cusp of that time where we're entering into a new era where I think astrology may take on a greater meaning or have some greater validity. At least this is my hope. Well, we'll get to that in the second half of the show. We're talking today with Robert Currey. He's a wonderful astrologer out of the United Kingdom. His website is Equinox Astrology, one long word, equinoxastrology.com. You'll find him there, and I encourage you to check out his website while we're on the break. We're taking about a 2.5-minute break, and we'll be back in a few minutes to continue our discussion about this sort of astrological conundrum, as I might call it. So hang in there. I'll be right back.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today, or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support.
Okay, welcome back to the show. My guest today is Robert Currey. He is the man behind Equinox Astrology is his website. Equinox Astrology is one long word, equinoxastrology.com. And you can order a reading from him there. You can get his horoscopes there. He's got a great deal of stuff. There's a shop, there's books, there's all kinds of interesting things that you can get there if you're interested in astrology. And I think that we sort of ended it the other way, saying that astrology is sort of coming into its own, and I do believe it is. I think it's difficult to say with any precision that it's going to be coming into its own, but I do sort of feel that there's a groundswell afloat here. And one of the things that may come as a result of this is that Western astrology may be more accessible to people than Vedic astrology, simply by virtue of the language and the terminology and all that. It is fairly complicated, and it's got its own vernacular, which is incredibly difficult. But I do hold, and I'm wondering how you feel, don't you think that if we took a Western astrologer and a Vedic astrologer, gave them the same data, and had them, separate them and have them to turn in their reports or observations of the individual, I think we'd see them to be fairly close. I think they'd be, spot on. I think the Vedic astrologers might get into more of the, the predictable qualities and stuff like that, whereas the Western astrologer might not do that. And I'm just curious how you see that. Do you think that that's a possible experiment, or is that a valid experiment?
Well, it would be a very interesting experiment, one that I should do myself, just to see how they come up on what comes up on my chart. I mean, I've obviously talked to Vedic astrologers about it generally, but never sat down and had a reading on that. But I think you're right. I think the difference will be the Vedic one will be more fatalistic.
Right.
And I think that is more reflective of how the culture is or was, because I think, if you go back 50 years, 30 years, a woman would get married, born in India, would get married at a certain age. You could be pretty certain, and that would be their kind of have a certain number of children. Whereas it's much harder in the West to do that kind of predictive work, and it may be a good thing, maybe because women have become more liberated. It is true, of course, of everybody. People don't follow the job of their father, which is how it would have been, certainly in even in the UK a few hundred years ago, people tended to do that a lot. So I think there is a shift, and I think that in India they are very interested in our Western system, because we've got probably a few million people speaking English with fairly westernized lifestyles, and really very much in control of their lives in India. And it may be that it's time for them to have more of a free will approach than a fatalistic approach. So there's got to be some kind of shift in possibly in the Vedic system, or shift towards the tropical system. It's possible that could happen.
Yeah,
I think you. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
You had a lovely comment about being a really developing time for astrology, and I think you're absolutely spot on there. It really is. A lot of the astrology is available to a wide audience for free on the web.
Of course.
And so this means that a lot of people can experiment with the topic, and we've had a much wider audience. They may not be as invested in the topic because there is fewer things to invest in except for personal horoscopes, personal readings, that type of thing. But the other side of it is the empirical side has started to develop. I went to a conference in Florida, and there were a lot of people doing proper research. And we were, astrologers never really did this when I first started. There were just a few enthusiasts. And it's, and that I think is a road to improvement. The other big development, as you know, is the translation of ancient texts by Robert Hand and Robert Schmidt. And, and that has caused something of a revival for the traditional astrologers. So it's a very exciting time.
It is a very exciting time, and I think that when you look at some of the sites that are out there, yours is one of them. I think Astrodienst, of course, is one of my favorites. Just so rich with information that it makes it very accessible for people to get in there. And I think that we are also at a point where we have I wouldn't say we have the patience, but we have the mental capacity to wrap our heads around these concepts. Because when you stop and look at what astrology provides and and the accuracy that's there, especially with regard to relationships and decision making and phases of our lives, it's hard to walk away from it. I mean, it's just hard not to believe it. I mean, we see these themes, especially in mundane astrology in particular. We see these massive trends happening in these sort of generational themes, and we can just see the havoc that's being wrought, especially in the United States now, and what we're marching up against. We've never had a Pluto.
Oh, and in the UK.
We've never had a Pluto return.
With Brexit.
Yeah, of course. Very, very soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, true. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And so here we are.
I think the mundane side is fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. I think it's phenomenal because it's just spot on. You can see the themes that are there. It's so obvious to me, at least, and maybe that's just my astrology brain thinking that way. But we really see these trends. This sort of in the classic Pluto sort of reconstruction that we're going through over here, this transition, this transformation of our whole, and the same was true for the UK, this sort of your basic foundational structures being torn down and then being hopefully being rebuilt in a better fashion.
Hopefully, fingers crossed.
And we certainly seem to have hit rock bottom here.
But it is interesting. We have I think it's a Uranus. I think it's square the moon in Cancer. I think in one of the horoscopes of the UK, and that is a feeling like there's a breakup of the family, like we're separated from one part of the family, and then maybe there's separation. The Scotland with it. So the fragmentation is we're looking at it, but you can't say that's the path. That's the thing. We really do have the choice.
We do have the choice. Just the fact that is part of the conversation. I can't envision Scotland wanting to leave the UK any more than I can see anybody else there stronger together, although there's been quite a bit of talk about that. And if Brexit happens, which it seems as if it has, that is a flash in the pan in itself and a very startling departure from what we've gone through. And to have that be so, I mean, you're about 2 years away from that actually kicking in, right?
Absolutely. Well, it's March 2019, I believe. So actually, it's sooner than that. But I think that one of the things that may happen, and I'm not sure if astrology necessarily can tell us the answer, but basically Brexit does not work, which is a distinct possibility. I'm not saying it won't, but if it doesn't work, and Scotland would definitely want to join the EU if it possibly can as an independent country. So I think that everything hangs on that one development.
Interesting. Well, that may be the lesson. That may be the lesson that gets learned with the sort of the rise and fall of any empire. They sort of hit bottom and then sort of try to rebuild themselves back up from there. But it is
absolutely.
It's interesting that March 20th is the day that they're going to do that. I didn't realize that was the day. That's sort of right on the equinox there, and that would be a fresh new start for England. to have to sort of fend for themselves. And I think the idea that they sort of want to be able to be equal partners as far as trade goes, but not as far as everything else, is going to be a difficult hoe to row, so to speak. It's got
absolutely.
Yeah, it really does. But I think especially, we look at the chart. The United States is a fairly young country. We look at the chart of the United States, and we can see this stuff happening very real. And it seems to be very clear here where we're headed, at least temporarily, if nothing else. I like to think that the pendulum has swung as far as it's going to swing, and now it's going to start and turn and go back the other direction. But, that remains to be seen. But it certainly has called quite a fracas over here, and things are definitely, it has been a jarring moment for us, just as it has been for you, in your country, to have this reality settle in on us as if this is, my gosh, how did we get here? We've got to quickly repair this before we all go to hell in a handbag. But, the idea that the astrology, as it evolves and as it becomes more, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. I think many people get very concerned about that, and many people often have a very dire view of it, or if they believe in, if they think of it or give it validity at all, they have a very dire view of it. Because they say, well, they always, when people approach me in the market, in the supermarket, or wherever, they always say, what's happening to me? Why is my life coming undone? I always say, well, you get these comments all the time. Yeah. But I do think that it has its merits in this quality of understanding ourselves. And what I've always thought one of the greatest qualities of astrology was that it allowed us to be tolerant of each other, because we are born a certain way. We can't change the way we are.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a wonderful thing about astrology. I will say that when I was, before I was into astrology, I always found it very difficult with Aries, and I had a grandmother who was in Aries, and they were always very confrontational. Then I kind of looked at what they were all about, and it's sort of become one of my favorite signs. But that really was down to astrology, and you do find that you can forgive people, you can understand people when they do stuff. I absolutely agree. I think that's one of the greatest things. And I honestly think if more people were using astrology, there would be a lot less conflict in the world.
Oh, I agree.
I
agree. Or at least they'd be able to choose their battles differently, at least, and nothing else. You'd say, well, I'm not going to... I'm not going to go to battle with a Taurus, for example, even though I could. I'm just not to. I'm just probably not, or a Scorpio.
Yeah.
And yet
I've just let them work it through.
Yeah. And yet, there's this.
Give them 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll be a different person. But I do love I love the opposite effects, though, because I do think that in the signs that are opposite us, we find that which is lacking in ourselves, and vice versa. So these are they're complementary. And how many couples have you seen in your practice who are who have successful couples, perhaps, who are with the opposite? I know many couples who are with their opposite, and they're quite happy as long as they get through that initial stage. Yeah,
I find with consultancy, there seem to be two types. I've noticed. There's some people who, say, for instance, you have a what I call a difficult sun in your chart, and you might well want someone who gives trines to that sun. So you get the, they say, no, you're not that bad, and you're good. Oh, well done, that was fantastic. So they get a partner who supports them, and then you've got this really strong and easy sun, and they need a partner who says, listen, get off your high horse. Stop preaching. Stop being. You're not the god or whatever you think of yourself. So, and they're the ones that the opposition really works. So I often look at the chart and think, what type of relationship would work best for this person?
Right, and I think that we find ourselves in situations where I always approach the opposites as sort of like a healing salve of sorts, where they sort of apply or soften you down, or especially with an Aries, I've got several good friends that are Libras, and they do bring out characteristics in me that my impulsivity and my impatience and stuff like that, and not pausing and just reacting are softened by the sort of the slower Libra, diplomatic approach of looking at all sides before you make a decision. That sort of always I find that to be comforting in some ways. It gives me a chance to say, maybe I'm just doing this wrong, and it's just my damn Aries headstrong self plowing through without any thought for anything. And
we just love the fact that you go out there and make these decisions, because And then we can, it's a bit like the Glenn Perry scenario. I can't remember Glenn's chart, but there is whatever. He's Pisces, maybe. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what his sign is.
Gone out.
Yeah.
I think he might be. But the idea that he's gone out and broken this ground, and that's very, very exciting. But obviously, there's the repercussions, and so I like the quality of doing it. And you know what? Just imagine the world, and you took out one sign. What a dreadful place it would be. I mean, you imagine. Just took Taurus out, and you'd have no banking, or you'd have no, you'd have chaos.
You wouldn't have the good restaurants and the luxury cars and the good chocolates and all that.
Exactly, yeah, and that's why.
Yeah.
So it's really, and I can't be having people saying, "Oh, I hate certain signs," and I think that is a projection of your own issue.
Yeah.
You've got to look at yourself and why is it you hate a certain sign? There's a problem. And quite often that I find in consultations, sometimes I talk to people and say, do you have a problem with this particular sign? And bang, and it's often Scorpio, Aquarius, that a lot of people have problems with. But they're wonderful signs, and it's because they have problems with Pluto, problems with Uranus.
It's really, and then you see interesting.
I was going to say. Yeah.
You see interesting people with these unusual combinations. Like I know someone who's a Scorpio sun, but also has a moon and rising in Gemini. So there's this sort of gaddis out there talking, chattering, nonstop thinking, mind going left and right like a Gemini would do. And yet there's this deep sort of smoky side beneath it all. And when I approach this person and I say, I think you're actually more Gemini than you are Scorpio, she gets incredibly angry about that because she doesn't like the idea. She'd rather be the Scorpio.
Well, it's the intensity is lurking underneath, and they kind of switch gear, and it's there, especially the person who lives with this, you said it's a woman, is it? And, they would get to know that side.
It's always funny. I talked to Robert Hand. I had Robert Hand on the show one time, and I asked him. I said, Robert, have you ever had people come to you wishing they weren't the sign that they are? And he says, "Oh, I had that many times." I said, "Can we change our signs?" He says, "No, of course we can't change our signs. But what we can do is we can adapt to it and learn from it and grow as a result of it. So we can morph into a much better or a different individual, knowing what our liabilities are. Like, for example, when I was younger." And, in my car, I'd get very impatient behind people who drove too slow, and I'd be honking my horn and, typical Aries, malarkey, trying to get around. Yeah. And then as I grew older and had faced more hardship and stuff in my life, I became much calmer. And that may just be age. I'm not saying that there isn't a certain impatience in me still. I still do impulsive things like, I click the button on Amazon way too often. But, there still is that. There still is that.
Buying flights too quickly. That's the problem.
Oh, yeah.
You end up in the wrong place.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. But, I have learned to sort of mitigate that and be cognizant of it. And when I do find myself, just based on that conversation I had with Rob, when I do find myself in that sort of impulsive mode, I stop and think, I don't have to be impulsive now. But having that awareness is what allows me to have that conversation with myself.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, I think one of the things is that the intuition is so strong with Aries that quite often you just know an answer, and so many times that you're right that one begins, it's only when you're wrong that's the reminders that you have to think about. But still, it's a great quality. I definitely had a point at which suddenly Mars became active in my life when I first started doing astrology, and I started to be slightly more aggressive, and it was a big sea change. And and I think I was probably a pretty difficult person for a bit as I was getting into astrology, but I needed to do that and then rein back in it. And I think everybody goes through this kind of subconscious stage in the first year or two of getting into astrology.
Well, you're sort of like a born-again Christian at that point. You sort of get this evangelical rush, and you want to tell everybody about it, and you can't wait. You can't wait to tell it, and you get all enthusiastic about it. And that's sort of how I was the same. I was very.
I'm pretty evangelical about certain things. When I meet people, I'm not evangelical at all. In a sense, I quite like to hear, discover what they're about before finding out about their chart. But it's usually when a skeptic writes something, or astrology is rubbish, and then I get very into it. And I'm going to just mention one of the sites I do. It's not a commercial site. It's astrologer.com.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And that's dedicated, because that may be of interest to people listening. We don't sell stuff on there, but it's really dedicated to the arguments in defense of astrology.
Right. I've seen that site. It's very good.
So well, the idea really is that I get so fed up with the same arguments over and over, I just know there's a page with an answer, and when someone puts it up, I just say, "Can you just answer this first, and then we'll see how we go." Mm-hmm. And and the bottom line is there really is only about two arguments that I think are difficult. The biggest argument is the mechanism. We don't know how it works, and obviously we'd be better if we did, but we don't know how it works, and maybe there's reasons for that. And then the other one is the evidence, and the evidence is growing. I started the list of tests that are supportive of astrology, and I came to about just under 10 when I first started, and now I've got about 40.
Wow.
And it's growing. And then that's just for humans. I mean, tests on animals, obviously, it's vast, because you've got all kinds of animals falling into the lunar cycle. And, but even now, there's medical tests on heart and the moon phase. And like I say, the psychological tests I've been doing. So there's a growing body of evidence. It's just going to be things you can pull in with confidence on one or two factors as well, which will enhance the chart and give us, maybe people will put their listen, people of the mainstream, people who say it's all rubbish will listen and discover that actually we do know what we're saying, and we are the critical thinkers. We're the ones who've actually got into astrology because we haven't accepted conventional wisdom, and we've looked at the evidence.
And the evidence is clearly there. There's not a farmer on the planet that doesn't live his life by the phases of the moon, I'm sure of, as far as planting and the cycles of the seasons. And when we take back the idea, when we look at the idea of the mathematics behind astrology and how it fits into this grand scheme that we're all part of, the mathematics is what is the core of all of our lives, and we know that. And so when we see these patterns developing and the results of it as a result of the results, it's irrefutable, and we just have to stand in awe, at least I do, of these wonderful, just insightful things that we see in the charts as they unfold. And that geometric precision I just love. We see these angles in all of our lives. We see the squares, we see the trines, we see the oppositions and conjunctions, and they're all there. They're in architecture, they're in art, they're in sacred geometry, they're in all the great temples you mentioned earlier. It's just all supportive in that way, Art.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I've written some papers on that. The incredible resonance within the solar system. It isn't quite astrology, but how the golden circle ratio comes up and the distances between the planets. And it's a very magical thing. And one of the things that, I kind of thought, I reluctantly accepted Chiron in the 90s, and now I think it's a fantastic point in the chart.
Yeah.
Because I have a very slow digestion. I'm just, transits and Ptolemaic aspects and, conventional.
There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn.
Oh, yeah, there is. And then suddenly I found that this object, Chariklo, fitted into the planetary scheme. And nobody ever talks about it. And I was really kind of dumbstruck, because I don't know what, maybe in 50 years' time, someone will be telling us Chariklo is, it's one of the centaurs. It's highly significant, but it came out in the data. So did Ceres as well. But the other objects didn't fit. And it was just the ratios suggested that it is interacting with the planets, because they all interact. The resonance with the gravitational resonance interacts with them all, and that's how they discovered Pluto. As you know, from the orbital elements of Neptune, we're reacting to Pluto, even though we are talking huge distances.
Right.
So it's hard to believe that we're in isolation.
Well, just looking at a standard eclipse, there's no such thing as a standard eclipse, but just a regular solar eclipse where the moon passes directly in front of that disk is just, to me, mind-blowing. I saw the eclipse this summer in the United States when I was here, and I was in a perfectly pristine area of the world on top of a building where there was no ambient light around, and the eclipse was absolutely textbook. It was in totality, and I watched the whole thing for about 2.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and I was 8 minutes from ground zero where the actual complete was. So 8 miles rather away from where it was in totality. So I was seeing the real thing.
Yeah.
To see that happen, you say, how can this small orb, which is only 250,000 miles away from us, completely cover the sun, which is 93 million miles away from us, with such accuracy? There's got to be a master plan here, and this is what we're seeing. This is why I always defer back to the mathematical logic and construct, and this is probably our best angle for for legitimizing astrology is the use of mathematics. That's where it's really going to pay out.
Absolutely, it's a mystery as to why they both occupy half a degree, and of course, an astronomer would say, or a skeptical astronomer would say, "Oh, it's just coincidence." But it is something magical, and I think in a way, you could look at it backwards and you say, perhaps it is just to make us all suddenly realize the symbolism of the cosmos.
Right.
To look up. I saw an eclipse in France, and it was a life-changing moment. It was incredible, right in the path of totality, and the animals, the lights on the yachts. I was just on the shore. And all the boats, the lights in the boats sort of came on automatically because of the darkness. But it was. It
changed me. I thought it was a absolutely magical experience. I have never seen anything like it before in my life. Not of totality. I saw them when I was younger. They were always partial. This one was just phenomenal, and I thought incredibly symbolically and archetypally telling the way it occurred in the United States, because it literally cut right through the center of the United States. And right now the United States is so divided politically, morally, ethically, socially. I thought, wow, this could not be more appropriate to have this eclipse slicing through the center of the country and saying, wake up both sides and get your act together. So I think this has started something. It's just phenomenally, incredibly exciting to see that. Wow. We could go on for hours. But anyway,
we've seen a lot of... We've
run out of time, but we've seen a lot of these great things, and I do appreciate them as for what they are, and they do take your breath away, and they are meant to be embraced and enjoyed, and they're meant to enlighten us in ways that we perhaps may not otherwise have been. But it does take a certain kind of person to subscribe to it and to sort of take heart and take knowledge from what we're seeing there. I do think that. So... fascinating. We've been talking today with Robert Currey. His website is Equinox Astrology, equinoxastrology.com. It's one long word, equinoxastrology.com. He's located out of the UK. Fascinating astrologer, lots of information there. I encourage you to reach out if you're curious about, no pun intended, if you're curious about the where you are in your life, where astrology is, how it works, how you can work with it, how it can be your friend. It's a wonderful tool to learn and something everybody should get to know at some point in time, and I hope that if there comes a point in time when they introduce it into schools as a study, especially high schools, for kids who are trying to figure out which way to go in their lives, they could learn a great deal from it if they could. So, Robert, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it. I know it's late for you over there, but I do appreciate you coming on. Had a great discussion with you, and I appreciate very much you coming on today.
Well, my pleasure, Chris. It's been great speaking to you.
Yeah, very good. Equinoxastrology.com, Robert Currey. It's Currey with an E, Currey, by the way. And I encourage you to Google him, look him up on the website, and see what you can find and learn from him, and you'll be a wiser person for it. So thank you so much, Robert, and peace be with you. Pax Vobiscum.
And with you, Chris.
Very good. Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.